Did I find the one, an endgame grinder for a mid-range price? I've had this grinder on and off my bench for the last 6 months for testing, and you know what? When it comes to performance for the price, it might just be. And if you stick SSP burrs in there like I did, you'll be getting some of the best espresso you're likely to ever have. So then what's holding me back from giving this a full S tier 11 out of 10 top marks rating? Let me explain. Quick disclaimer that Espresso Outlet sent me this for a review, but this video isn't sponsored and I can say whatever I want. However, this channel is supported by people who buy my new espresso notebook, the Brew Ledger. So if you like my content, the best way to support it is to get this beautiful book that helps you dial in your espresso faster and waste fewer coffee beans. Check the link in the description to find out more. The DF83V on paper already looks like a king in the making. It's a single dose grinder with huge 83mm burrs and motor speed control. It might seem like speed control just means faster or slower grinds coming out, but the more I experiment with it, the more I realize it's so much more than that. And this really adds a top tier dimension to any grinder. I'm still experimenting with my favorite settings, but the main thing that I see is that adjusting the speed gives you more or less variance in grind size. If the differences in size are large, there's more variance and you'll get more texture. And you get that by grinding faster. If you grind slower, then the grind size is more consistent and similar, so you get more clarity at the cost of texture. And what's great with these big burrs is that you can adjust this to the slowest or fastest settings and still get your grinds out really fast. The range goes from 300 to 1600 RPM, and the motors have enough torque that it doesn't really stall. Even at the lowest settings, I haven't experienced stalling. But the grinder does have a failsafe, so if you have a problem, you can get your beans out and just reset and use a coarser setting to grind out beans that get stuck on a super fine setting. I'm not saying the people who have reported stalling are not telling the truth. They might just be in North America where the voltage is a lot lower and maybe then the motors don't have enough torque to push through, especially with denser beans. Engineers, please leave a comment if I'm misunderstanding how electricity works. But at max speed, god damn, this is the fastest home grinder I've ever used. Here's an unedited grind speed video on the maximum 1600 RPM with 18 grams for an espresso. It seriously only takes like 3 seconds to grind out 18 grams at a fine espresso range. That's insane, and I haven't seen anything smaller than a Malkonig EK43, a 2,500 pound commercial grinder, go through beans that fast. The question is this a good thing? Are there any negative trade-offs with such a fast grind speed? With all that surface area from 83mm burrs, that gives a lot of space to grind fast, but reduces the compacting that happens with smaller grinders. When beans go down into the burrs of smaller grinders and can't migrate out of the burr chamber fast enough, this can lead to some clumps or regrinding of the same beans over and over. So then you end up with some super fine powders that have been reground, and sometimes you'll also get big clumps of grinds that are compacted together in the burr chamber, and those can promote more channeling. This grinder also has something that is becoming more and more common on modern grinders, which is an Orga, which feeds the beans slowly into the grinder chamber, so there's way less of that regrinding that I was talking about earlier. Now we can look at the grinds in the D-Fluid Omni, a particle analyzer, and it gives a pretty good visual representation of what's happening. You can see that there are a few more courses and maybe a little bit less of a spike on the highest speed setting. Although the clumping is always pretty minimal on this grinder, as there's a plasma generator and a declumper that are really very good. I can't complain about those at all. When I take the speed down to 300 RPM, you see a bigger spike here and generally a much smaller range of grind sizes. The way I think of this in general is that the greater the spike, the more clarity you're likely to get. And if there are lots of fines on this end and coarses on this end, you'll have more texture. And although I can't confirm this yet and I need to do a little more testing, I found that very even distributions without considerable spikes tend to taste a little bit muddy, bland, and less interesting. Take all of this with a pinch of espresso grinds, and if you want me to do a video really digging deep into particle analysis with multiple grinders and tests, let me know in the comments which grinders you think I should test. Just a quick thing, I had a really great conversation recently with a guy from one of these espresso lover Facebook groups, and I learned something really important. What I think we may have stumbled on is the reason why going at a slower speed is not really optimal for this grinder. You see, the Orga on the DF83V, which is the part that pushes the beans into the burrs, is doing a very different job than it would be on something like the Mazda Philos or the Zerno Z1, with not really much pre-braking going on with this grinder at all. It's kinda just brute forcing the beans through the burrs, and on slower speeds, it's moving a little bit too fast for the burrs to grind through, which would explain why there's a little bit of regrinding going on and more fines at the slower speed than there really ought to be. A large amount of fines is more likely to give you an unpleasant espresso in the cup than having a large amount of courses or even a wider particle distribution. These grinds will have all of the nice compounds pulled out of them very quickly, and then they'll just start pulling out astringent and unpleasant flavors which will ruin your espresso. So my suggestion with this grinder would be to grind on a faster speed than something like 800 RPM to make sure that the beans are not being fed too fast and regrinding and causing these extra fines. Thanks so much to Aaron for the conversation we had about this. Now to those burrs. I got two different shaped burrs in the box with this, the espresso burrs and the brew burrs. Both are diamond-like carbon or DLC coated. They're black and supposedly are harder and will resist wear and blunting for longer. I've had this for 6 months and the burrs still look super sharp, but I'll update the pinned comment when I replace them. Now of course, I don't really do pour over or filter, but I did put these brew burrs in my grinder to test them out for you, and no, they can't do espresso, so I switched them back out again. If you want to know about this grinder for filter, then there are lots of other people on YouTube who know enough about filter to review this properly. I'm just an espresso guy, and the espresso burrs are really great. And you can see the way it's designed, it kind of shaves the beans bit by bit as they go towards the outside edge. A lot of my favorite espresso burrs look like this, and it creates a decent midpoint between uniform grind size where you get that burst of flavor and some fines and courses so you get a velvety mouthfeel. Now, I'm not going to drink a shot and tell you how delicious it is because that's boring to watch, but I will tell you that these burrs are some of the best stock burrs out there. I switched SSP burrs in there recently, and these are just the absolute kings of flavor, and so I've been having insanely good espresso ever since. Changing the burrs wasn't particularly hard, but it did require a bit of realigning for the SSP burrs. You can use this technique called the shim method. You just make little aluminium shim out of kitchen foil and stick them under the bit that's not touching the other burr to bring them up to the same line. The way you can tell is by coating around the outside of the burr with a marker and seeing which part gets rubbed off when the burrs touch. If all of the marker comes off, congrats, you're aligned, and if only one small part comes off, then you know where to put your shims. The thing I noticed with the brew burrs is that the outside ring is really tiny and also a black burr, so it can be a little hard to see where the marker has rubbed off. You could try using a white chalk marker instead, but it's possible to do with my trusty green one here. Once you put the front back on, there are two power switches here to turn the machine on. It's already a bit weird. One of them is sort of a knocker that's reminiscent of a heavy industrial machine. The reason to have two power switches is the machine has anti-static in the chute, which seems to work well, although I'll get back to that later. But personally, I really don't like the look of this knocker. It's a pretty odd design choice here, though it isn't really a big deal as it's just the on-off switch. But my issues with the look aren't just the little things. The black version of this grinder, though it may look more premium than the silver in my opinion, is a little bit hard to see the catch cup. I can't tell you how many times I've not had the catch cup there or knocked it on this magnet base because of the shape and design of the little pathway to the back here. And don't get me started about knocking the chute off its magnets. This feels like a bit of a misstep after the really great implementation of a two-part magnet chute on the DF84V that was just perfect for the task. I know that version wouldn't work for this design, but I feel like it must be at least 10% of the time I pull the cup out and the chute comes with it. Part of the problem might be the base here, and I can't really see a way around it in this form factor. The cup slots into the magnet base here, and as always, you guys know I love magnets, but then it has these little ledges over here so it goes in the right place, and if you try to pull the cup out of the side even just a little bit, it's close enough that you'll probably pull the magnetized chute with it. When it comes to retention, I think this grinder is really good, but it is a little bit hit and miss. Sometimes you'll find a ring of coffee around the chute here, even when you're using the bellows, and when I opened this up, I must have brushed a good 2 or 3 grams out of the brew chamber over the course of maybe 100 shots or so. Granted, this was after a few months when I switched to the SSP burrs last time, and it is normal to have a little bit of extra coffee grinds stuck in the nook and crannies. And I don't mind having bellows to get the last of the grinds out. I think it's a fine if inelegant solution to retention, and here it seems to be well implemented, but perhaps the angle angle of the burr chamber means that the air isn't passing through in the same way as it was in previous cylindrical models of other Turin grinders like the DF64 and 83. And there is a removable anti-popcorning disc in here as well, which stops the beans from bouncing out when they're ground up. Another thing that's a big change is the horizontal mounting and the faceplate. Twisting this front face here adjusts the grind, and to get the 0 point you'll need to use this little hex screw here that comes with it. You adjust the face and find the burr's touching point and then tighten it up. It's probably the easiest 0 point adjustment I've found on any grinder so far. I like this because it's subtle and not annoying like its variable speed challenged brother. So after using this on and off for half a year at this point, I can honestly say that this is a killer grinder for the price. It'll also go all day. I brought it with me on a family holiday just a few weeks ago when I came back from Japan, and it did espressos all morning like it was nothing. So then why do I feel like I want the Mazza Philos back on my bench? Or why am I excited to play with my new VS6 with all these beautiful burr options? Well, part of it is that I just love gadgets and shiny things, but part of it is that while the DF83V is an amazing grinder for an incredible price, it's just not as fun or as beautiful to use. It doesn't feel as thoughtfully designed as something like the Philos, and now it's not the days of the original Turin DF64, other manufacturers have caught up in the single dose home grinder front, with great burrs, nice design, and many of the same features. I love that there's this competition, especially on price, which is great for consumers, and I don't think there are really any grinders that can compete with the 83V in terms of just raw price for performance. It's kind of mad what they've been able to cram into this machine for this price, but there are definitely other grinders up at the top tier with it, and some that are more satisfying experience to use, or maybe just that look a lot prettier. Either way, if the look doesn't bother you and you want to pick up a DF83V, check the description below for my link. Thanks so much for watching, you wonderfully overcaffeinated people, and I'll see you on the next one.